experience has taught me that you can have a successful relationship with every combination, every type of person, every type of personality style. You can actually have a relationship work depending on a few key factors. And so I thought a lot about what those factors were and what was it that actually made certain relationships successful and others that weren't, even though character-wise or personality-wise they appear to be pretty compatible.
Hello and welcome to episode 99 of the Living and Leading with Emotional Intelligence podcast. I'm your host, Brittney-Nichole. Today should mark episode 100. Unfortunately, last Wednesday, when I was supposed to release Parenting with Emotional Intelligence, I was sick with COVID pneumonia. Yeah, after I returned from Spain, I became sick with what I thought was the flu, and then it later turned into pneumonia. So that said, I missed a week. I apologize for that. But I am super excited to bring you today's guest and to get back on track finally. Today's guest is Colin Wilford. He is a South African psychologist who spent several decades in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, counseling couples, advising young people on their careers, coaching executives on leadership skills, and becoming an expert in emotional intelligence. 5 years ago, Colin moved to the US and resides now in Utah and has since started his own consulting company in Salt Lake City, Wilford Scholes, which he is the CEO of. Colin has quite an interesting background, and there are so many directions that we could take our conversation. However, since Colin just developed a dating assessment to help couples identify and work through red flag areas in order to become the best possible partner they can be, I thought it would be a really good place to start, since I don't have a lot of conversations about relationships on the Living and Leading with Emotional Intelligence podcast. So that's the direction we're going to start with the conversation. But as always, we'll see where it goes, because I typically bounce around with my guest, which I personally think is fun and I enjoy. So I thoroughly enjoyed having this conversation with Colin, and I definitely can see a follow-up in the future, as there is so much we can discuss. As with the previous, if you were watching the YouTube version of this conversation, I try to have a dual perspective. Unfortunately, the past two conversations, that hasn't been happening just because of some connections issues with Zoom. So hopefully that irons itself out before we have the next guest. But without further ado, here is Colin Wilford.
So let me go right back to the beginning, I guess. I was a professional athlete before I got a real job. I was a track athlete for South Africa, basically for the country I was born in. And then realized that I need to start a career to obviously sustain a lifestyle and all that kind of stuff. And so I started looking into psychology and went to school and qualified as a clinical psychologist. And at the age of 27, I basically set up my own private practice. So I was very young, fresh out of school, and trying to figure things out. And so I set up a practice, and I've been in private practice ever since. I did that for about 25 years, and then probably a little bit less, 23 years. And then I got offered an opportunity to come to the United States and run a company here. Before coming here, I got very involved in training emotional intelligence, assessing for emotional intelligence, helping individuals, couples, and organizations raise their EQ, and all sorts of training. So any development around people development, leadership, stress management, self-mastery, certainly EQ is all part of that as well. And I've also got involved in a lot of career counseling over the years, and also recently designed an online tool which assesses for compatibility between two individuals who maybe meet online or who are considering having a relationship. It's so scary, you know, when you meet people that are just really a picture or a face behind a screen. You don't really know what you're getting into. So I designed a tool to help answer those questions. And so right now,
yeah, sorry.
sorry.
I was just thinking, do any of us really know what we're getting into, even when we meet the person, you know?
We don't, but you know, through psychometric testing, which is obviously what we do as psychologists, we're able to look behind the mask, dig a bit deeper, trying to understand what's really going on behind just the sort of the initial first impression. Mm-hmm. And we're getting pretty close to finding out the really important stuff before we commit to anything.
Yeah.
And so currently run a business called Wilford Scholes. It's my last name and my business partner's last name. And we're situated here in Salt Lake City, but we have offices in Liverpool, England, South Africa, Canada. And so we have quite a nice broad spread around the globe. And we do everything people-related, people development, people training, psychometric testing. And of course, EQ is one of those very important areas. So that's a quick rundown of what I've done.
That's amazing. So normally I ask people in the beginning of the podcast to introduce themselves in their own special way, but I feel like that was an amazing introduction. So although I didn't intend to have that in the podcast recording, I think I'm going to clip that and put that for your intro, if you're cool with that.
Sure. No, that's fine.
That was a great rundown. Awesome.
Good. No worries.
Colin, I am excited to dive into this because there's so many places that we can go from here. So thank you for being on the Living and Leading with Emotional Intelligence podcast.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So all of these places that you have lived and you have coached and you have practiced as a psychologist, you talked about you went into psychology, but I don't believe you discussed the reason behind going into psychology. There's so many fields to transition into from being a professional athlete. What made you gravitate towards psychology?
That's a really good question. So from the age of 15, I clearly remember being fascinated by the brain and how the brain works, and being really intrigued by personality and personality differences and how people turn out so differently when they may have had very similar life experiences or been raised a similar way, and they sort of have their unique style of doing things. And memory always was a fascination. And so I would read up on how to improve memory, how to develop a photographic memory. I was always so impressed by people who could remember stuff. And that got me really interested. And I just had I guess I had a natural compassion towards people. What I didn't tell you was I spent some time in the Navy as well. And in the military, even though you trained to be this sort of machine that has to do things, I always had a lot of compassion and empathy, and I realized that side of me couldn't be ignored and couldn't be quieted. So getting into psychology was a very natural thing for me. I would always listen. I would always be interested. I'd always be the one to want to understand why somebody was struggling and what was going on in their lives. And I wasn't afraid of that. I never ran away from that. And so I guess those are the reasons why going to psychology was just a natural, normal thing for me, because it's always been part of my life since I was a teenager.
Very interesting. Very cool. What did you learn about yourself? Because I went for psychology as well. And I think through that, you also discover things about yourself. Like you have those aha moments. Was there anything that kind of was like, oh, I get this now. I understand why I think this way or why I do this. Did you have that at all?
I think there are many aha moments. And certainly when it comes to anxiety and why did I become anxious when I had to publicly talk. When I was young, I was very shy, and I actually used to stutter. I would struggle to pronounce my words because I was very anxious about coming across very well, or not very well. And I guess there were a lot of aha moments as to how my self-worth was being measured. What was I using to measure my self-esteem, and what was I attaching it to? And there's always these aha moments in terms of, I can't keep attaching it to achievement. I can't attach it to anything that I've kind of ticked off or got on a podium for. I had to find that self-worth through just accepting who I am and my character and just my natural personality. So yeah, that answers the question. There were many of those aha moments.
Yeah. And it's interesting how we perceive ourselves is just the way society really has told us that we should view ourselves. And when you're able to get rid of those social scripts, it kind of, it's enlightening, right?
It is. We always have so many masks we put on. And so we have our social self, our sort of professional work mask we put on. And then behind all of that, there's always the true self that we know is there, but we often are afraid to show it because we don't want people to judge us or to think, negatively about us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's talk about relationships, because again, you've done things like all across the board in regards to psychology and emotional intelligence. You've worked with leaders, you've worked with couples, but I don't think I've ever had anyone on the podcast to talk about relationships that I can recall. So I think that's fascinating to talk about emotional intelligence in relationships and the assessment that you've created. I have to admit that I'm kind of skeptical of many assessments because I think a lot of them can be manipulated. And I think they're a great tool. Don't get me wrong. They're a great starting point. But as you know, we're more complex than an assessment can identify. There's so many nuances to things. So I'm curious how you went about developing this, what exactly it does, what are some of the questions? So if you wouldn't mind, just kind of enlighten me on this assessment created.
So every single time I've ever done an assessment on anyone, I always have the preamble or the precursor that says, we can never reduce you to a test. No matter how hard we try, you're always going to be far more complex than any test. We use these tools purely to try and help you understand yourself by the way you answer certain questions. We use them to kind of look beneath what you're trying to portray to the outward world. But I always absolutely agree, and I'm glad you raised it, that people are a gazillion times more complex than a test can ever show. But it's a science we try and use to answer certain questions. When we do profiling for, and I'll come back to the relationship thing, but when we do profiling for job placement, and we're looking for a leader, or we're looking for somebody who's good with analytical skills, we can test those things. We can test how their brain works. And so when it comes to relationships, it's a whole different ballgame. So let's get into that. First of all, and if I don't quite answer the question, please always bring me back. But I'm going to try and sort of paint different pieces of the puzzle, if I may, or different pieces of the picture.
Yes, please.
A long time ago, when I was sort of starting out practice and counseling couples, I really was dumb and short-sighted, and so thought that if I'm an extrovert or someone's an extrovert, they've got to connect with like-minded people who like to go out and connect with people, and the sort of whole opposites might be a difficult way to have a relationship. And so other aspects of personality, you get leaders and followers, and you get those that are decisive and very indecisive. You get those that are too accommodating and those that won't accommodate at all. And I always saw those as clashes when it comes to relationships. But experience has taught me that you can have a successful relationship with every combination. every type of person, every type of personality style, you can actually have a relationship work depending on a few key factors. And so I thought a lot about what those factors were, and and what was it that actually made certain relationships successful and others that weren't, even though character-wise or personality-wise they appear to be pretty compatible. So the first thing that I saw consistently was communication. Communication is such a vital part of any relationship success. And even if I'm a huge introvert and you're an extrovert and we're in a relationship, we still have to communicate. We still got to connect. And we've still got to almost like do a debrief of what's going on in our lives and what's happening in our day. And so what my wife and I always used to do was we would have a chair in the bathroom, and when it was bath time, she would jump in the tub and I would sit on the chair and just talk. And then when it was my turn to jump in, she would climb on the chair and we would just continue talking. And I've often recommended that to so many other couples that, you know, life is busy, there's kids, there's work stresses, there's all sorts of issues to deal with, but make a time to really just connect, even if you think there's nothing really to talk about. Rather just start talking and just start connecting. And whenever we moved house or you know, bought a new home or moved countries, we would always go to the bathroom and go, I'm not sure a chair's going to fit in here. We've got to get a house that has a big enough space for a chair to be next to the tub. So anyway, that's a very important thing. The second thing is consideration for others and basically empathy for others. And we can get into a whole different discussion around, you know, narcissism and social dysfunction and basically psychopaths who just seem to be blunted emotionally and don't care about the needs of others. But if you want to have a successful relationship, you both have to be thinking about and considering what the other one is feeling and how they are experiencing not just the relationship but life. And so empathy for others and consideration for others is such an important one.
Yeah,
I'm going to go through 10 factors. We've discussed 2, and every factor makes up the acronym of the word what I've called connections, but it's spelled with an X, and that's the name of the test. So the test is called awesome. The test is called connections. Anyway, so the C is communication, the O is others, consideration for others. Then the N is really the narcissism factor. And the reason why I had to bring this in is because pride and selfishness and egocentric behavior is always going to destroy a relationship, no matter what your personality. If I become self-centered and I become more concerned about what's in it for me and what am I going to get out of it and why am I not getting enough attention, that starts to affect all relationships. And so in the questioning for all of these factors, I have chosen, it's a brief attitude survey, but I've chosen specific questions which kind of look into the attitudes that people have towards these important topics. Like, for example, if I'm assessing narcissism, one of the questions is, I have no patience with stupid people, true or false? And most people that are kind of proud and think that they're special, they would always say, yeah, so true. I don't have time for stupid people.
Yeah.
Because they're always judging people to be stupid. They're not giving people the benefit of the doubt, and they're not giving people due consideration. Stop me at any time because I can just ramble on about these things.
I'm loving this. Please keep going.
Then the next factor is empathy. Now, it's slightly different to the others. So the others is really just consideration for others. And this is real, genuine empathy. Can I really empathize? And this is so it's CONE, and E is for empathy. Can I really empathize and express what I'm feeling and what other people are feeling? Am I able to express my own emotions? So can I connect with how you're feeling? And this is all part of EQ. And can I also express how I'm feeling? It's all very well communicating. It's all very well talking. But to really express feelings and emotions, that's really
it's complex.
Yeah, and it's what makes the relationship really really successful. So some of the other factors now that are important is certainly we come to the X. The X is the middle point. And the X factor is the physical intimacy, the physical connection, the consideration for what my partner needs, what my partner appreciates, what my partner doesn't appreciate. And it's really just being open about that and to really have that intimate discussion around how I can be sexually satisfied, physically satisfied. And it's a very important part of any couple's success in their relationship. And certainly over time, with most relationships, these things start to change or they become less frequent. But couples need to keep talking about it. They need to keep talking about what the other one really needs. And so in those questions on the assessment, very direct questions, how attentive am I to the physical needs of my partner? Do I see to my partner and not just think about myself? Am I selfish in the way I try and gratify my own physical needs? And so it's quite a sort of deep dive into what really is important in that whole intimate relationship between two people. The other areas that become important are your interests and hobbies. There's this age-old misconception that we have to have the same interests, we have to have the same hobbies for a relationship to be successful. And it's not true, because you can be completely different people. You can be married to an artist when you are completely unable to draw stick figures. You can have an interest in earthworm migration, which is a weird one, and your partner can be interested in completely different things. But the important point is that even though you may have separate interests, there's got to be something that connects you. There's got to be something that you do enjoy to do together, whether it is hiking or going on vacation, or it's skiing. In Utah we ski a lot. So there's got to be something that does connect you.
Yeah,
you can't be completely disconnected, because that also doesn't work.
Food is a great way to connect as well. I love connecting over food.
Oh yeah, no, food, absolutely. Food is exceptionally important, and especially good food. And then we talk about financial needs. This is one of the biggest issues in relationship breakdowns, where we have spending patterns that are different. We have saving patterns that are different, attitudes about how we deal with money. That's also different. And it's so important that every couple is on the same page when it comes to how we spend money, how we save money. And of course, that's such an important part of any relationship success. I want to just quickly refer to a graphic. Give me a second.
Sure.
I might not be able to show you that, but I want to just call it up here quickly.
Sure.
So I don't mean to have a break. As I walked in from the traffic jam, obviously.
No worries.
So what I've also created is something we call connection conversations. And so with each of these,
would you like to share your screen?
So I'm actually on my phone on the video,
Oh, okay.
and I don't want to break our recording.
Sure.
So what I've done is, so after the individuals or the couple takes the assessment, I then send them questions which they need to think about, which will hopefully invoke a discussion and invoke a real deep dive into each of these areas. And so I'm just going to get to narcissism here, which is always a fun one. I want to go back to that for a second. So one of the questions I ask is, do you really know better? Do you really have a better idea than everybody else around you? Have you ever considered the fact that somebody may actually have a good idea which is better than yours? And why do you have this need to always be right? Why do you have this need to always have the last say? Think about that. What are you trying to achieve through that? So I'm kind of doing a bit of a therapy session with the individuals when they've done the assessment, so they can actually think about each of these topics, because they're so important in having a good relationship. Anyway, so just moving on. The other factor is that we talk about is stress. How do we cope with and deal with stress? My wife struggles with stress, and she doesn't mind me saying it. She struggles with when there's a lot of pressure from life, and what do I do now? How do I manage this? I fortunately am able to process it a lot more efficiently, I think. Maybe my training has helped me. But the point is that we deal with stress differently. And it's so important that we talk about this. And as a couple, whoever you are with, that you speak about your way of coping with stress and what's going to be a healthy way to cope with stress. And in the conversations piece that I always give them after the assessment, I get them to talk about, well, what are we going to do? What strategies are we going to use to basically deal with stress? And when life gets hard and when we're under pressure and our toes are being put to the fire, how do we manage that? How do we cope with that? And of course, there's so many healthy habits to get into to deal with stress, like healthy eating and exercise, and making time for yourself and defocusing and all those fun things that you can do to help with your stress. One of the other areas that I assess is your attitude towards optimism. How positive are you? Is everything always seen negatively? Do you always see a problem with everything that basically is thrown at you? Or do you try and see the positive? Do you try and sort through the chaos and try and find a positive way through? And so this part of the assessment is very important, because I see so many couples, or I have seen so many couples, where one person just seems to drag the conversation down all the time. The other one's trying to be positive and optimistic about the future, and hey, I've got this new job and I'm looking forward to this. And the other one's always going, yes, but, and have you thought about this? And I don't think it's a good idea. And there's always a but to it. And those buts just kind of get in the way, and they really frustrate the other person.
Yeah.
And then last of all, but not least, we talk about the spiritual connection that two people may or may not have. Now, this is an interesting topic, because I had this couple that I assessed, and they both came out extremely low on the spiritual sort of indicator. And that's absolutely fine, because for them, religion or some kind of spiritual philosophy that they live by wasn't important to either of them. And I just said, well, that's totally cool for the two of you. I mean, but if you were different, that's where the issue comes in. Where if one is extremely focused on their faith or some kind of philosophy that they want to live by, and the other person isn't, and they always kind of get into conflict about it, that's where there could be an issue in a relationship.
May I pause you there for a moment, Colin?
Yeah.
When you talk about spirituality, because this topic has come up in conversation quite a bit, I think there needs to be that distinction between spirituality and religion. A lot of people get those two things confused, when spirituality can be your purpose, your greater purpose in life and connection to your values and ethics, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you for raising an important point. Religion is a totally separate thing, and people either are part of a religion or not, and that's completely their choice. And spirituality is the state of mind and an existence and a philosophy that you want to live by and a set of values you want to live by. And it's interesting how some people don't always know what that is for themselves, and they don't care about that really, where others do. And others find it very important to live by a certain set of values and a philosophy. And so in a nutshell, the C is communication, the O is our focus on others. The N is the narcissism. The E is then emotional expression and the ability to empathize. The X factor is in the middle. That's the X part and the physical intimacy. S is for stress. How do we manage stress? The I is interests and hobbies. And then the O is optimism. And then last of all, we have then it's N for financial needs. And then the last S is for spiritual. That makes up the word connections, spelt in a very unique way. CONEXSIONS. And so that's the tool I've just created. But when I want to dig a bit deeper into emotional intelligence in relationships, I use another tool called the EQI, which has been around for a while. It's actually a emotional intelligence assessment that's been used by many companies, individuals, therapists, counselors around the world. And it's just a nice, very deep dive into the actual EQ side of things. And so sometimes I use that as well when it comes to talking about relationships and working with people. So just to let you know about that.
So I went through the EQI 2.0 certification.
Oh yeah.
And
you did. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't really use it though. And the reason being is when I went through the training, and I'm not saying that, again, it's not a good tool, the way that it was taught through the training, I felt was kind of, I don't want to say dehumanizing. That's not the right word, but it was very mechanical.
Yeah.
And I don't like that. I really like that human element to things. And the one I believe that I took was 50 questions that I was trained on. I think that sounds about right.
Yeah.
And it didn't seem to use a lot of scenario based questions. It was kind of like, are you this or are you that? And I can't remember it exactly, but the one that I like the most for emotional intelligence is actually free. It's by Psychology Today. And it's 146 questions.
Okay.
And they give you, if you want the full 22-page assessment, it's like $10.
Okay.
And out of all the assessments that I've personally taken, that's one of my favorites, even though I got trained with the EQI. But to each their own, right? We all have our preferences for assessments and tools.
So you've raised an important point, because I was on the board for a testing association in South Africa, and so we would always look at new tests coming through and kind of rating them and evaluating them and see what's going to be applicable. And there are these words we use in psychometric testing called ipsative and normative. I don't know if you must have heard about that.
Repeat in your that training. One more time.
Ipsative and normative testing. So an ipsative test is where they force a choice, where you have to choose a word to kind of describe you. Yeah. Like, of these 4 words: enthusiasm, seriousness, positivity, methodical, which word best describes you? And so you're forced to choose one of those words. But the scenario way of testing, where if I put you in a certain scenario, and how would you react? Would you be the one to withdraw from a social conversation, or be the one to jump into a social conversation? That is more a normative way of testing. And that's actually more valid and more reliable when it comes to really understanding a person's behavior. Mm-hmm. And so ipsative, which is what we call forced choice, is the most unreliable way of testing. And normative, and putting yourself in scenarios and seeing how the typical normal population would respond and how you would compare yourself to that, is what we call normative testing. Anyway, to make it really simple, I prefer tests like that too, because it also, and I haven't tried that one, so I need to try it. So thank you for sharing it with me.
Yeah, of course.
It's really important to test in a far more effective way than just forcing somebody to make a choice when it might not really bring out who they really are.
Exactly. Yeah. I was at a networking event a couple weeks ago, and the guy asked, he said, well, so what do you do exactly? And I told him, I help people develop their emotional intelligence and awareness. And he goes, oh, I have really high emotional intelligence. And the fact that he had to say that made me,
he just failed.
That right there shows that you don't have self-awareness. The fact that you have, anyways, goes back to your in for the narcissism, right? Like, I need to show you or tell you that I am an emotionally intelligent person because, So let's talk about your connections. Because like you were talking about with the narcissism, I think of ego, right? And I'm currently writing my second book called The Ego Ruins Everything.
Oh, wow.
Because it really does. It puts all of these filters on the lens of reality, which we're humans, right? We can't live without the ego, but it's all about that awareness of the ego and seeing it interfere with our interactions and thought processes and decisions in life, right?
Absolutely.
And so when I look at all of these different, this acronym, I see how the ego plays into many of them.
It does.
Right?
It does.
I mean, the majority of them. Communication is the first one. I can't read my chicken scratch. Communication, others, the X factor, stress. What are some other ones? Spirituality. What was that? Financial. I mean, all of these. Like when I'm reading through this, it's like the ego can ruin all of those.
It can certainly. And coming back to the EQ point you made right in the beginning in relationships, I love summarizing emotional intelligence into really 4 points: understanding how I feel, and then managing how I feel. That's the second one. Third one, understanding how other people feel and how to manage how other people then behave with those feelings. And if we can master those 4 steps and those 4 points, it certainly filters into how they deal with stress, how we deal with stress, into the financial aspects, the intimacy side of things. It filters into everything. And couples and individuals who have healthy EQ are always more successful. They just get it right. They're patient, they understand, they listen, they empathize, they express the correct feelings when they need to. They understand the need for others to express those feelings and to have opposing views to themselves. If I have a different attitude about finances, if I'm good with my EQ, I will hear you out. I'll listen. I will process what your perception really is all about. And so that ego certainly gets in the way when we don't listen and we trying to assert ourselves and we're trying to bulldoze our opinion and our position and our way of doing things. The ego certainly gets in the way.
Yeah.
I'd love to read that book.
Yeah. Colin, these are fantastic. I would love to see this full assessment. And I usually don't get excited about assessments, but everything that you've identified is spot on. And I can think of two extreme relationships that I had. So I've been married twice. I'm in my second marriage. I know I'm young, but my first marriage was with my high school sweetheart. We dated from 15 and then got married at 21. And I was not an emotionally intelligent person back then. I had all of these issues like anxiety, panic attacks. I would just say whatever was on my mind and I didn't care. Right. And so when I think about the communication element, I would let that narrative in my head run wild. Like I wouldn't communicate things. I would create this false narrative and then I would react on that false narrative. We weren't in alignment with our interest, finances, spirituality. We stressed each other out. I mean, it was just a really bad situation. And the ego, for me, that narcissism, I wanted everything my way. Like I had to have control of everything.
What's wrong with that?
A lot of things. And then as I developed my emotional intelligence over the past, the years fluctuate because sometimes I say 7, sometimes I say 9, because it's kind of a fuzzy thing when you start developing a new skill or way of being. But the marriage that I'm in now, we've been together for 5 years. We've never had a fight, not once. Okay. I was waiting for that honeymoon phase to be over with, but I'm a more effective communicator now. And I am able to control my thoughts and my emotions and understand how it's impacting other people. Such a key element, right? Like spot on with all these things. Good. That's awesome.
Well, I'm glad you've taken yourself through that journey of becoming emotionally smarter and emotionally more mature, and certainly that's the secret to any success in a relationship. I always get so worried when teenage romances, end up in marriage, because they just become so different. I mean, you've proved that. When you become an adult and you start to experience life and start to learn what life's really all about, you change.
Oh yeah.
You're supposed to change. And I just see so many of those relationships falling apart because they change in different directions. So I'm glad you got it right the second time. Well done.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a wonderful journey, and I've learned a ton about myself in the process. So I would love to hear some stories when you've worked with couples with this assessment, kind of the breakthroughs and where some people were at in their relationship and where they are now as you coach and counsel them through this.
So just to clarify, this assessment is brand new. I've just created this. I've literally, we are completing the website right now. We're about to, hopefully the software guys, I must talk to them after this meeting. Hopefully they have completed the payment link so people can pay for the assessment. So it's new.
Very cool.
But I have been doing a few pilot studies on couples. I have been using it to kind of test it out to see if it really works, because that's obviously important in creating any new tool. But I can speak about some of those couples, and I can speak about couples in the past that I have, even though this is now a formalized assessment, I've certainly assessed those areas in conversation, in asking the right questions, because they're all the same key areas. So that's just the positioning of how I'm going to answer the question. So I'm just one of the first really difficult cases I worked with, which I'll never forget. There was this judge. Man, he was a narcissist personified. I mean, he always knew better in his mind. He always had the last say. For goodness sake, I'm a judge. I'm smart, and I know the law, and I know what life's all about. And so his poor wife was always just overrun by him and his opinions and his attitude and his position. And they came and saw me because they were really in trouble. And she just could not take another day of living with this guy. And so it was very hard to start the therapy, because with any narcissist, as you would know from some of your reading and understanding, narcissists don't see a need to change. Why do I need to change when I'm so wonderful? And you should be grateful to have me in your life. You should be counting your lucky stars that I'm in your life. You know, that's kind of the attitude always.
Yeah.
So I had to get her to reflect how his way of doing things made her feel. And at first he could not identify with that. Well, so what if it upsets you? I'm right anyway. And so what if you get upset by that, or you don't like that, when my answer is better anyway? And fortunately, the woman he was married to was also exceptionally smart, but she was just very timid in her approach. And so she was super, I was really impressed by her. I mean, her ideas, her thoughts, her ability to do things was quite impressive. And so I had a lot to work with, which really helped in the therapy session. And so when I reflected back to him, her perspective, her positioning, her way of understanding, and was able to gently, without threatening him, help him understand, look, you may be a judge, you may be smart, but yours is not the only position. Yours is not the only intelligence that is at play here. Mm. And your partner, we need to look at what makes her of value, what she is uniquely gifted with. And we had to focus so much on helping him understand her unique abilities, her unique gifts. And we did make some breakthroughs, but it was extremely difficult, I must be honest, because the true narcissist just doesn't want to change for anybody. I can't claim that they ended up being happily ever after, but at least we made some progress where he was able to shift and understand it's not just my way. Right. There are other ways, and I've got to be a little bit more humble about it. Unfortunately, he was smart enough to reflect back and go, I'm going to destroy every relationship that is important to me if I don't actually rethink this whole thing. Then I had this young couple, and this was recent, and we were using this assessment. And every time she had spoken to me about the relationship, because they were newly married, she'd always complain about what a narcissist her husband is, and he's such an idiot, and he's always thinking about himself. Anyway, we did the assessment, and he comes up so well with empathy and understanding and not putting himself first and having compassion, and the narcissism indicator came up completely in the green. He was fine. Uh-huh. She came up in the danger zone. She came up with all these flags. And I sat with them and I said, look, here are the results. Let's talk about them. And she's like, no ways, that's not me. That can't be me. I said, you answered the questions. I didn't answer the questions. She said, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm the one that's actually always wanting things to be done my way. And I just never thought of it that way. So again, it was a really useful application of the tool, where he was so humble that he never even thought that she was wrong. And so basically, when she would say, you're always thinking about yourself, it's always your way first, it's going, I'm so sorry. I'll really try hard to change that. I'm so sorry I was doing that, because he was humble enough to always be looking at himself.
Wow.
Anyway,
it goes back to that saying. It goes back to that saying, if you spot it, you got it. Because we always see in others what we ourselves struggle with or judge ourselves for.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, good old Sigmund Freud, and I know we've moved on from a lot of his theories and his original thinking about psychology. We've moved way beyond that. But
right.
One of his defenses that he speaks about is something called reaction formation. There's projection, which is projecting our own faults in other people, and we kind of blame other people for it.
Mm-hmm.
But reaction formation is taking it to the extreme. So, for example, if I am guilty of child abuse, I'd be the one on the corner with the banner saying "Stop child abuse," and I'm running these campaigns, and it's a sad way to think about it, but a lot of people that are quite obsessive about certain causes, you got to just be very careful. Maybe they themselves have been guilty of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it's always a way of understanding behavior, I guess.
That is so true. And my friend and I were having a conversation about this in relation to politics yesterday, which I'm not going to get into politics. But I do want to say this, and this accounts for politics or really any area where there's polarization in life.
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating that the same people that complain about a candidate saying one thing or a president saying one thing, as soon as another person gets in office and says the exact same thing, their opinion about it completely flips. And that's where you have to ask yourself, am I wholeheartedly supporting this individual and what they quote unquote stand for? Or am I supporting what they are saying, right? The actual cause and stance itself. And very few people stand by the cause and stance itself and tend to side with the party or individual.
Exactly.
Which shows, right?
And we've seen that. I mean, the last 4 or 5 years of American politics, we've seen that flipping all the time. And you're absolutely right.
But it goes back to your point, that extreme where the person, as the example you use, doing the abusing is the one saying, I don't believe in abuse. Stop abusing.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. People are interesting, aren't they?
And, we are.
And I, as a psychologist, as I've looked at I arrived in the US, and I promise also won't make this a political discussion, but I arrived here in 2016 in August, right in the middle of that presidential running, between Trump and Hillary Clinton. And of course, I've seen that whole thing play out, and I've now, I'm here now with this new change and everything. And man, I'm just going, can the general public just not see what they are doing wrong when it comes to exactly this point where they're flipping, and then now they're blaming the one when they were praising the exact same thing a few years ago.
Yeah,
it's like, oh my goodness, are we ever going to look at ourselves and be honest about what we're really doing?
And that's the only way we can change. Again, and this applies to every facet of life, right? Not just in politics, but we have to be able to see both sides and understand what is our common goal and focus on that common goal. Because if you ask anyone that has an opposing belief as to someone else, their deep-rooted values tends to be the same or at least overlap in many ways, right?
Sure.
But we don't see that. We would rather bicker and tell each other why the other one's wrong and point fingers instead of do something about it. And the one term that really grinds my gears, if you will, is, well, you have to choose the lesser of the two evils.
Yeah.
So if you are in a room with a cobra and a black widow spider, and you said, well, you got to choose the lesser of the two evils that you want to engage with, what would you do in that situation? You would get rid of them both, right?
Exactly. I'd get rid of them both. I would absolutely avoid both.
But we don't believe we have that control. We've been made to believe that we have to choose one or the other. When really the people, the majority, can say, this has gotten out of hand on both sides. What do we want to stand for?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And while you were talking about that, my mind immediately went back to relationships. Nobody in any relationship or any political opposing position wakes up in the morning and says, how can I ruin that person's life today?
Right.
Or how can I cause trouble today? That nobody wants to do that. And on both sides of a relationship, both sides of any opposing political position, there are good people who want to be happy, who want to be safe, who want to do good things. There are good people on both sides. And we forget that. And so we end up just fighting because we want to win, not because of what's right.
Right.
And it's the same in arguments. And you spoke about how you haven't had one in the last 5 years. But in disagreements, I guess maybe is a more constructive word, constructive disagreements, we end up fighting because we just want to win the discussion and we forget the reason why we originally were having the discussion. And so we basically turn it into a conflict situation when it doesn't need to be, because they're two good people who are just trying to be heard, trying to be understood, trying to be respected, trying to bring about something positive. And that's why they're taking their position. But we don't see it like that. We just see it as a way to tear them down, prove them wrong, break them down, and make ourselves. Isn't it sad how we try and elevate ourselves by breaking others down?
Yeah.
Instead of leaving them where they are and just raising ourselves and basically dealing with it that way, instead of breaking them down to elevate ourselves. Anyway,
goes back to the ego getting in the way.
It does.
Yeah.
Ego gets in the way. Yeah, that darn ego, right?
Yeah. And when you were talking about the arguments, it's like we lose sight of the objective. What is the outcome that we're looking for? And instead, we're so focused on how we're going to reach that objective. That's what we're arguing about, is how we're going to do it. But at the end of the day, most of us have the same common objective. And within relationships, that's important, right? If you don't have that same objective, that's another issue.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anyway, there's so much we can say about that.
Yeah. Well, Colin,
on the same page.
This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for being a guest on this show. And whenever you have that website up and running with your assessment, please let me know so I can add that to the show notes. If you already have a URL for that you know you're going to use, I can go ahead and add it in the description.
Thank you. I will.
And where can people find you? And any last words?
Well, I mean, I was going to say we should have it up and running by next week. That was the plan. So I'll let you know. I can leave my email address or a contact number if people want to get hold of me. Should I give that to you now, or?
You can send it to me in an email and I will put that in the show notes. But if there's any last words that you would like to share with listeners or viewers that may be struggling in their relationships, I would love for you to do that.
Well, the first thing is we've got to be honest with ourselves. We've got to take a look at where we are and what we need to be doing to improve ourselves and to become masters of ourselves for us to be a better compatible partner. The mistake we always make is we point fingers and we make it the other person's problem. You are the reason I'm unhappy. You are the reason this is not working. And whilst there may be some truth in that, first look at ourselves, first look at how we can elevate ourselves. And if we can get in the habit of doing that, the funny, interesting reaction that may happen is the other person then starts to do the same. Because you're looking at yourself and you're being honest with who you are, they may even start to do that too. And if they do, you got a chance of success. If they don't, then obviously there's a different decision to make. And you've had to make that decision before. So those are my last words. And thank you so much for inviting me to be here and to allowing me to be here.
Yeah, it's
and
my
to have
pleasure.
this really good discussion.
My pleasure, and very well said. Very well said. Thank you so much for sharing. I am really looking forward to putting this out there. And those who are listening and watching, they're like, oh, I'm already watching and listening. But I'm really excited to share this with people. Thank you so much, Colin. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.